Welcome to English 9, Differentiating Biases from Prejudices, Part 2, Quarter 3, Week 2. I'm Mr. Nelpon Sambalad and I'm your teacher for this course. I do believe that the images you are looking at now are quite familiar on you already because we had them the last time. I even asked you what are those images, and you said that the first image has something to do with people who are talking to one another, who are pointing ideas about something that they are sharing with others, and you have there as if people who are trying to speak about their thoughts regarding things regarding what they knew already about a particular topic or subject. And you said that it's a perfect image, it's a good image communicating prejudices. As we go on discussing the lesson, let's figure out if we do really have correct ideas regarding that image, if it really communicates prejudices. Of course, the second image, you have there the word biased. So dealing with the biases. Unconscious bias is what? What is it? It has something to do with instinctive categorizing people and things without being aware of it. So whenever you are fond of doing so, you're being biased already. Okay? So it's a flaw in thinking guided by past experiences and mental preconditioning. So that's the definition of the word bias. So did you know there are more than 150 types of biases? So it's quite interesting to know what are those 150 types of biases. And they impact us, our work, and our relationships. That's why we need to be mindful in our words and actions for us not to commit biases. How to deal with biases? First, know them well. We must know the people well. We must also read about them for us to recognize that they exist. Number two, think critically, attend to data and evidences, look at problems as a diamond and not as a coin with only two sides. Also, challenge assumptions and traditions. Take a contrary view. Ask why and why not. Often embrace diversity. So you practice also empathy so that you will not be that biased or you will not be that an advocate of biases as you go on communicating and dealing with people. So it's a good infographic about what is being biased or what is the word bias. Okay, so let's proceed to the discussion proper of what are prejudices and biases. Detecting an author's bias and prejudice is considered an important skill in critical reading. Having the skill to determine biases and prejudices will help you validate or invalidate an author's claim. Moreover, distinguishing the two from one another may help you critically analyze situations and make a stand in pressing concerns at present. Look at the definitions of bias and prejudice below. So, for us to better understand what are biases and prejudices, let's figure out the definition of each. Let's start with the word bias. Whenever we say bias, it's a tendency to present or possess a partial viewpoint, being in favor or against of thing, person, group, or stand compared to another, usually in a way not considered fair. Your one-sided perspective in the absence of neutral viewpoint. And whenever we say bias, to lean in a certain direction, either in favor of or against something. Next, leaning favorably towards something or thinking positively of it when used with a preposition toward, bias toward. Then leaning negatively against something or thinking poorly of it when used with a preposition against, biased against. So you see, having the following definitions or examples on what is being biased, then by now you know what is bias, okay? So the thing that you must have in mind there is what? You have there what? A partial viewpoint. Again, a partial viewpoint, and you have their being in favor or against of a thing, person, group, or stand compared to another, usually in a way not considered fair. So, whenever you are biased, you are not being fair to someone or to an idea being presented to you. And you have their what? You have their prepositions that communicate biases. You have there the preposition toward. Whenever you use it, you are what? Positively favoring something. Okay? As you say what? Toward the benefit of the youth. So there's already what? A bias in your statement as you utter that line. The same is true with what? I am against the organization. So you already have there what? The bias against the organization as you use that preposition against. Okay? So those are the definitions of the word bias. Now let's figure out what is prejudice. Whenever we say prejudice, it's an opinion formed before getting to know relevant facts of a case or situation. Meaning to say you have it already in you. Okay? You haven't studied yet something, but before it is being presented to you, you have that opinion already in your mind. Okay? Then it's a favorable or usually unfavorable feeling or claim toward a person, thing, or situation without an actual experience as a basis. So you haven't experienced it yet, but you already have in mind against ideas against it or against that person. You haven't met that person, you haven't dealt with that person, but you already have your set of negative things about that person. So that's prejudice, okay? Then a preconceived notion or assumption made about someone or something prior to obtaining enough knowledge to guarantee accuracy. So, as if you're no longer interested of knowing more about that person, or accurate facts about that person because you already have this preconceived notion or assumption about that person. So that's how we categorize a statement or an idea under prejudices. Okay? So again, we have bias and prejudice. So having the definitions of those examples on when are you becoming biased or prejudice, hopefully you have understood so that as we go on, then you can simply answer the activities that we will be discussing. Okay? So that will be all. Let's have the next slide. For you to better understand what are biases and prejudices, let's have examples. So we have your under bias and prejudice column. So let's have the first example. An employer is biased against women. He promoted a man over a more deserving female candidate. So why is it under bias? So the employer has not been fair in his choice. Okay, so the employer has not been fair in his choice. And you have there the word what? An employer is biased against women. So you have there the praise bias against women. Okay, so let's have under prejudice. The citizens didn't vote for a particular candidate who did not graduate from high school because they think that candidate is not capable of leading them due to limited educational attainment. So why is it under prejudices? Not being able to finish education doesn't mean a person cannot lead. So that's the typical assumption of people regarding political candidates who are running for certain positions in the government. Whenever they heard that these people or those people haven't finished tertiary education, then they already have prejudices about those people, having in mind that they cannot lead the community because they knew less. Okay, so that's under prejudice. Next example. Someone is biased toward her own religion. She thinks their beliefs and practices are superior to any other religion. So why is it under biases? Because you have the what? Thinking that your religion or that the religion of yours or of that person is better than someone's religion. So not knowing the rules, the beliefs of other religions, then the person already claimed that his or her religion is better than someone's religion. That's why it's under biased. Then under prejudiced. Prejudices against young people suggest that they are indifferent and reckless. This can be used to underestimate or ignore them. So, what's the prejudice there? Having the mindset that the younger people are indifferent and reckless. So, not all youngsters are indifferent and reckless. So, prejudice. You have the opinion already in mind that what? That the youngsters are indifferent and reckless, but not all of them. So that's prejudice, okay? So that will be a perfect example under prejudices, just like the first one, talking about what? Talking about the candidates who haven't finished schooling and they will not be voting for those because they had in mind that they couldn't lead that good because they knew less. So, under prejudices. Let's continue. Let's continue presenting the examples that we have under biases and prejudices. So we actually have here explanation for that a person who thinks that his or her religion is better than someone. So we have here he she thinks most highly of her religion and none other than can surpass that. So it's kind of the same with the example with the explanation that I provided regarding that person who assumes that his or her religion is better than someone's religion. Then here, dealing with the youngsters being reckless and being indifferent, the explanation provided here is that this is an overgeneralization. Young people can make wise decisions and contribute in addressing societal issues. So it's prejudice. It's a prejudice thinking that the youngsters cannot do better, that they cannot contribute to the progress of the community. So it's an overgeneralization. And whenever you do that, that is what? Under prejudices. Okay? Next example. There was a heated argument between two students in class. The class president defended his best friend even though she's at fault. The class president is biased toward his best friend. So the class president took his best friend's side even when she's wrong. And you have there what? The class president is biased toward his best friend. So you have there the use of the preposition toward, meaning to say he or she is leaning favorably to his or her best friend. Okay, you have there the favoring of the class president towards his or her best friend. That's why that statement there or that situation is presenting a biased situation. Then under prejudice. Prejudice against older people with the notion that they are weak may be used to deny them employment or abuse their rights. So why is that statement under prejudice? So old age isn't a reason to deny old people their rights and ignore their capabilities. So you have there the mindset. So prejudice against older people. So although you have there the use of against older people, you have the preposition against. It's not under being biased. But what we have here is what? Is the pre-thinking. Okay? It's the thinking that what? That the older people or the notion that older people are already weak. That's why they should be denied of employment, which is what? Abusing, which is a manner of abusing their right. So that situation or that statement presents prejudice. Okay, the prejudice against the older people. So I hope that having the three examples under each column will certainly or have clarified your confusion about what are biases and prejudices. Okay, so as we go on answering the activities, the more you will be enlightened. What are the statements under biases and what are statements under prejudices? Learning task 1. Look at the pool of words below. From these words, identify which can be associated to prejudice and bias. Place the words in the surrounding circles. So we have here the circle bias and prejudice surrounded by 5 circles. So we have the following words: unfair, favoritism, preconception, one-sided, first impression, assumption, partiality, preference, stereotyping, and overgeneralization. Now, the thing is, where are we going to categorize them? Are we going to put the following words under biases or prejudices? So let's have it one at a time. How about the word unfair? Is it under bias or prejudice? Five, four, three, two, one. Correct. It's under bias. How about favoritism? Bias or prejudice? Five, four, three, two, one. It's under bias again. How about preconception? Is it under bias or prejudice? Five, four, three, two, one. Correct. It's prejudiced. How about one-sided? Is it being biased or being prejudiced? Five, four, three, two, one. Correct. It's under being biased. How about first impression? Is it under bias or prejudice? Five, four, three, two, one. It's under bias. Okay. How about assumption? Is it under bias or prejudice? Five, four, three, two, one. Okay, you got it right. It's under prejudice. How about partiality? Is it under bias or prejudice? Five, four, three, two, one. Okay, that's under bias. Next, we have the word preference. Is it under being biased or prejudiced? Five, four, three, two, one. That is under prejudices. Okay, correct. How about stereotyping? Is it under bias or prejudice? Five, four, three, two, one. It's under prejudice. Okay, how about the last word? Overgeneralization. Is it under biases or prejudices? Five, four, three, two, one. Correct. It's also under prejudices. So hopefully you get there a perfect 10 out of 10. Okay? Categorizing words under biases and prejudices. Because as you hear a word, then you can tell instantly whether there is a bias or prejudice thing that is occurring. Learning task 2. Tell whether the statement is true or false. Write yes if it's true and no if it's false. Number 1. Prejudice behavior can be a result of bias. True or false? It is false. It's no. Number 2. A biased person considers all sides of an issue. No again. Number 3. You might not get all the needed information if you read a biased source. Yes or no? It's yes. You might not get all the needed information if you read a biased source. It's a yes. Number 4. A video telling you to vote for someone is an example of unbiased source. Yes or no? It's no. Number 5. Prejudice indicates the preference that something is better than another. Again, prejudice indicates that the preference that something is better than another. Number 5 is yes. Number 6. Bias is when someone has a one-sided opinion about something. Bias is when someone has a one-sided opinion about something. Number 6 is yes. 7. Prejudice is a preconceived opinion of another person based on reason or experience. Prejudice is a preconceived opinion of another person based on reason or experience. Number 7 is no. Number 8. Judging a person's character through his or her physical appearance is a form of prejudice. Number 8. Judging a person's character through his or her physical appearance is a form of prejudice. The answer is yes. Number nine, when a person has a neutral viewpoint, she or he is unbiased. Again, when a person has a neutral viewpoint, she or he is unbiased. Yes or no? Yes. And last number, if you are biased towards something, you are in favor of it. Number 10, if you are biased towards something, you are in favor of it. True or false? The answer is yes. Okay, we are done on task 2, learning task 2. Let's have the next learning task. Learning task 3. Read thoroughly the given situations. Identify whether each shows bias or prejudice. Justify your answer. Number 1. Juan Cruz, 25, cross-dresses as a woman whenever going out to party with friends. A group of young men started shouting homophobic abuse at him while at the parking lot of a bar one Friday night. Juan was repeatedly punched and kicked, leaving him severely injured. So, where are we going to categorize it? Is it showing a bias or prejudice? This is a form of prejudice because you have the group of young men who maltreated Juan because of their prejudices about cross dressers. Okay? So it's again a form of prejudice because you have the group of young men who had who had prejudice about cross dressers. Maybe they thought of him as someone else who must not be treated equally or fairly, or someone who must be taught a lesson because of his preference on dressing. So if they have that thinking in them, so that is a prejudice. Okay? So it's what? It's a prejudice about gender. So you have there the prejudice about gender wherein they are not that gender sensitive. Okay? So for number one, it's a form of prejudice. Second situation, from a column in the Philippine Daily Inquirer 2015, the entire Torre de Manila debate pits history against commerce but could have been averted if the chief protector of the Philippines' historical heritage had done its job. So it's a form of what? Bias or prejudice? Because what? So this is a form of bias because you do not have there the statement coming from the chief protector of the Philippines historical heritage regarding on what he had done about the issue on the erecting of the entire Torre de Manila. Okay? So it's a form of bias. Number three, a character named Darcy in a novel written by Jane Austen didn't see Elizabeth fit as a wife due to her lower social status. During the time the novel was written, a well-educated and wealthy man wouldn't marry someone from a lower income household, believing that such a woman wouldn't be able to function among the upper class. So this is a form of prejudice because it it presents the prejudices regarding the social status of a person, that you have the notion already that whenever a person is poor, then that person cannot rub shoulders with the upper class and cannot manage to do so. So again, it's a form of prejudice. Number four, according to a journalist who took a stand that sex education must not be part of the basic education curriculum, teaching sex education may activate and heighten the learner's curiosity and eventually lead them to engaging in sexual intercourse at an early age. This is a form of blank because blank. So again, according to a journalist who took a stand that sex education must not be part of the basic education curriculum, teaching sex education may activate and heighten the learner's curiosity and eventually lead them to engaging in sexual intercourse at an early age. This is a form of blank because blank. It's a form of it's a form of prejudice because you have the prejudging of the understanding of the young ones regarding the knowledge of them when it comes to sex education, and you have the line that it can heighten the learner's curiosity and eventually lead them to engaging sexual intercourse at an early age. So it is what? A form of prejudice because the effect is not really such. Okay? So it's a prejudice. Number five, the Happy Smile Association promotes their newly launched toothpaste, Jolly Teeth. According to them, their product is better than any other product as teeth whitening agent. This is a form of bias because it's for the purpose of marketing. And there's no such research showing or justifying that their brand is better than other product. So it's a form of bias because it is highly written for marketing purposes. And there's no research or statistical record showing or data showing that their toothpaste brand is better than other brand. So it is again a form of bias. Okay? So we are done on numbers 1 to 5, categorizing the given situations, whether they are in the form of bias or prejudice, and of course, justifying our answers. Okay? Let's go on. Learning task 4 on prejudice. Write about an experience related to this quote. Don't judge a book by its cover. So I would like you to revisit your memories regarding a certain experience of yours, pointing out the so-called prejudice, dealing with the saying, don't judge a book by its cover. So write a paragraph narrating your experience, pointing out the word prejudice or being prejudiced in your paragraph, relating it to the saying, don't judge a book by its cover. So kindly check your Google Classroom, look for your Google Form link regarding this activity. Number two, and biases. Writer's bias is an author's favorable or unfavorable opinion towards something or someone. Look at the following statements. Number one, death penalty is not the key in addressing the growing number of heinous crimes happening in the country. In this sentence, the writer is biased against death penalty, which means she or he is not in favor of it. Number two, mass testing is a highly necessary initial step in order to stop the COVID-19 cases from exponentially increasing. In this sentence, the writer is biased towards mass testing, which means she or he is in favor of it. Identify the writer's bias in the given statements. Explain in one sentence. Number one, we are in a democratic country where everyone has a freedom to talk and express their opinions. Every issue can also be handled in a more systematic way without having martial law. The writer is biased against having again martial law. Number two, the enforcement of shifting scheme in classes in Luis Palad Integrated High School is aggravating as it hampers the progress of the class. The writer is biased against the enforcement of shifting scheme in classes in Luis Palad Integrated High School. Number three, having a senior high school program in Luis Palad is a massive abatement and assistance because most students lack financial resources to go to other schools. So you have here the writer's bias towards having a senior high school program in Luis Palad integrated school. So hopefully, as you read a sentence, then you can easily detect whether the writer is biased against or biased towards the issue that is being pointed out in the statement. Okay? Let us have a quick rundown on what you have learned already about biases and prejudices. Again, whenever we say bias, you have there the partial viewpoint demonstrated either when in favor or against something or someone generally considered unfair. And whenever we say prejudice, preconceived opinion or assumption made regarding someone or something without an actual experience or enough facts as basis. Okay? So those are the basic definitions of the words bias and prejudice. Why is it really necessary for us to study the difference between bias and prejudice? So knowing the difference between the two may be useful when, number one, reading and listening, to validate what you have read or heard, whether what you have heard about something is bias or a prejudice for you to verify whether the person who is speaking is presenting to you facts or just subjective content of what they believe to be right or wrong. Okay? Then, second, speaking and writing. To think carefully and objectively of an important issue before saying or writing down your opinions about the matter. So, that's the good thing whenever you know the definition of the word bias and prejudice. You will be guided whether what you are going to write there will be something bias or prejudice about a certain subject or topic. It's the same with what you have learned regarding subjective content and factual information. So you will be guided whether you are presenting there a good stand regarding the subject that you are writing about. So That's the good thing about knowing the differences between bias and prejudice whenever you are indulged in reading and listening and speaking and writing. That's why it's very important to know the basic definitions of the words bias and prejudice and the skill on differentiating them that good. Okay? We are now on the assessment part. Determine whether the line, statement, or situation is considered a form of bias or prejudice. Write B for bias and P for prejudice. So we have your numbers 1 to 10. So all you have to do is to check the Google Classroom and look for the Google Form link for you to accomplish the assessment part of our discussion to check whether you have really understood our discussion about biases and prejudices. Okay? So good luck. Reflection part, directions. Reflect on what you have learned on this lesson about differentiating biases from prejudices by completing the statements below. Number one, I learned that biases are and prejudices are. Number two, the task in this lesson which I think I was best at is blank because blank. And number three, I realized that the things I learned from this lesson are important because they will help you on validating the information that are being presented to you. Okay, so only number three will be answered by me and the rest will be answered by you. So that would be all for the reflection part. Thank you. Have a good day and God bless us all.